I think a lot of people would agree the most disturbing thing about housing these days is the prices. Ooh, great house in a great neighborhood with a great price, but it's haunted by the spirit of a serial unaliver? Time to have a seance. Not to kick it out. No, the power of Christ compels you to start kicking in rent. Speaking of, realtors. What's the most disturbing thing you've learned about a house you were selling? Story 1. My wife and I are realtors in Los Angeles. San Fernando Valley, to be exact. We were on caravan with a colleague who is significantly senior to us and has been in the market a long time. We went to a new listing and my colleague said, "Oh, I know this house," in an off-putting tone. We asked what she knew and she said, "I'll tell you when we leave." It's a lovely little home in a multi-million-dollar area of Sherman Oaks. Clearly has had a few different owners over the years. And although it cosmetically needs a lot of work, you would be thrilled to own a sweet home like this in that neighborhood. The asking price was well over $1 million. When we leave, I inquire again from my colleague about what she knew of the house. It turns out a family that lived there in the early 80s was brutally, and I mean very brutally, unalived and tortured in a home invasion. Apparently, it was quite a big story in the area at that time, and as I said, she is significantly senior to me and has been a realtor in LA since the late 70s. But there was no internet then, and time moves on. We got a little obsessed. My wife and I are true crime fans about the house and wanted to see if we could dig anything up. After a little bit of time scouring the internet and newspaper archives, we couldn't find anything. That really bothered me. As a realtor and someone who really tries to be an extraordinary service provider for my clients, I want to be able to provide that kind of information to a client. It's so easy now to Google something and expect the entire history of that thing to come up. But it's not until you experience a situation like this that you realize not everything is available online. Now, for the really messed up part. California real estate law is such that you have to disclose a death on the property if it occurred within 3 years of that death. However, if the death was violent and you know about it, you have the obligation to give that information to your client no matter when it occurred. But if you don't have that information, then you're perfectly well within the law. I've come across lots of homes where there have been a death on the property, but if it's a normal death, it's usually not that big a deal to your clients. However, an unnatural death is a big deal for most clients. All I could think of was the many agents and brokers who were in the house and the agents selling the house, and how probably none of them knew what I knew, albeit after the fact. I'm not a big believer in the paranormal, and I'm not scared of ghosts, but I certainly wouldn't want to be the new owner of that house. Imagine spending $1 million on your dream home and not knowing something as horrific as that happened there. I have other stories, but this is the one that always stuck with me. I always look at a home for sale as if I were the one buying it. This one got to me. House in the 80s. And something bad happened there. Yes, that is tragic. Again, I may be out of touch with the housing market. I don't know if it would bug me that much. I mean, unless there's physical evidence that's still all over the place. If I could get a good house at a good price, there's a lot I'd be willing to overlook. Story 2. I've been witness to a few and heard of some others. The first one involves a couple who bought a house in the 1980s. They called me a couple years ago wanting to sell. As we're talking, the wife starts telling me about her difficult pregnancies and how she'd been pregnant many times but lost them all. I feel bad for her, but I'm wondering what this has to do with anything. The husband pipes up and says, "After the last one, I didn't know what to do. I came home, and the first thing I thought to do was remodel the kitchen. I had to break something." He goes on about his impromptu kitchen demolition, dishes still in the cabinets and everything. The guy was devastated that they'd lost another baby. Anyway, he says he's ripping out a corner, and he always knew there was a dead pocket there because the span was like 3 feet but the closet behind it was only 2 feet deep. He rips out the drywall and finds a ball of cloth. As he pulls back the layers, he realizes it's the skeleton of a baby. It was wrapped up with a teddy bear. He called the police and said they never got any follow-up on it. The next was from another realtor I knew. They get a closing and the seller is late. An hour goes by and he's still a no-show. The agent is calling and getting no answer. She knew the seller's nephew, who let her in once or something, so she calls him. He drives over to check on his uncle. He opens the door, and there's the uncle, unalive on the floor. He's wearing his coat and has one shoe on. He perished putting his shoes on so he could go to the closing. And yes, the buyer still bought the house, but it took a few extra weeks to close. Another one from my own experience was a house I was asked to sell. It was a fixer-upper, but it was on a nice plot of land. The sellers had some weird relationship going on. She was in her 20s and he was in his 50s. They were married, but she called him Daddy, and she dressed like a party girl. They were not well off by any means, so it's not like she was with him for the money. Anyway, I decided to Google their names to see what came up. They'd been busted for running a puppy mill in the garage, and all the dogs were discovered frozen solid in the dead of winter and severely malnourished. After that, I just ignored them. I couldn't even talk to them to tell them I wasn't going to list their house. And the last two are the most outrageous. I'm going to have to hunt it down, though. It's long, and I posted it a long time ago. We'll update shortly. Edit? It's too long. Had to make it a separate response. Hunt around or check my recent history if you're interested. I wonder if that story is going to show up later on in the video. I can't really tell. That last one is pretty disturbing, that they ran a puppy mill in the garage. It also depends on the conditions. I'm pretty sure the conditions of that puppy mill were not conducive to the health of the puppies. That's pretty tragic. Story 3. Well, not me, but a house that my parents own. My father was speaking with a previous owner about anything he needs to know about the house. The previous owner starts mentioning that a man who lived in the house as a tenant was brutally shot and only made it to the backyard before he had perished from loss of blood. The house is located in a very bad area of our city, so shootings are not at all uncommon. Fast forward a few years, and we find out that one of the people living in our house was selling substances. The substance dealer is eventually arrested in that house, leaving his wife, mother-in-law, and daughter in the house. Few years more, and we need to kick out our tenants because they hadn't paid rent in months. A few nights after my parents went to go tell the tenants to leave, or else they were going to get kicked out, the house burst into flames. A very large portion of the house was in ruins. All the kitchen, one of the rooms, and most of the living room burnt to a crisp. Luckily, the insurance covered the damage. Thankfully, the house has been sold. Last thing I heard about it is our now ex-tenant, a new one, was not paying rent and got into a very nasty fistfight with the people in the neighborhood. He got into the house completely covered in blood and bruises. They had to call the ambulance to save the guy, too. A small word of advice, people. If you're going to buy a house, always take location into account. Sometimes buying a house in a dangerous neighborhood for a cheaper price can prove to be a big mistake. The oft-used phrase in our area is location, 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 meaning you can change a lot about a house, fancy it up a bit, but location, the one thing you can't change, can be a deal breaker. Yeah, this sounds like it's more disturbing about the area around the house and not the house itself. It's kind of amazing that they were actually able to rebuild the house. Did they build or remodel? Was there anything that they did as far as building that house that did anything to help sell it? And how were the people being interviewed for this? Was there any way to check up on them? What was the credit checks or the background checks like? Very, very tragic information about that house. Very much about all the several different pieces going on there. Story 4. Okay, so when I was doing the rounds looking to buy my first house, we had made an appointment to view this little college which was totally in our budget. We weren't familiar with the area, so we got there about 45 minutes early. Instead of just waiting around for the agent to show up, we decided to take a tour around the neighborhood and found another property that had an open house on. This one was so not in our budget, but decided to take a look anyway just for shoots and giggles. It was very fancy pants. White marble flooring, gym, its own freaking hairdresser room. Anyway, the property was split level and built on the side of a hill. So I'm super interested in looking at everything just to see how the other half lives, and I go into the laundry room, which was at the back of the bottom level of the house. Off the laundry room, there was another door which was smaller than a standard doorway, lengthways, and I thought, oh cool, a secret passageway. So I go through the doorway, and it's a passageway that runs long ways down the back of the house. One side is the dirt, and the other is gyprock. So I follow the passageway to the end, and it's very dimly lit. And at the end, it opens up into a small room which the current owners were using for storage. I nearly soiled myself when I spotted. There, standing amongst random boxes of who knows what, was a life-freaking-sized replica of Freddy freaking Krueger. I noped the hell out of there, and we left very quickly. Suffice to say that we looked at the other property, but did not put an offer in. That house is still on the market 4 years later. Story 5. I'm not a realtor, but suppose the story's relevant. My extended family used to live in a really old house located just north of London. Previously, it used to be Queen Victoria's stop when she was traveling the area. I'm told my uncle, Mom's sister's husband, when younger, never believed in ghosts or spirits and would be the first one to call it a load of rubbish. He was sleeping one night and was awoken by a man staring at him at the end of his bed, dressed in an old army uniform. My uncle froze for a few seconds, panicked, and flicked the bedside lamp on, and then the man vanished. He refused to sleep in that room from that night onwards. We later found out that the man was a previous owner who had returned from war to find his wife having an affair. He was so furious that his wife reported to have told her he would do the worst thing possible to get back at her. He took his twin sons, toddlers at the time, went to the back of the garden where there was a forest, and shot them both dead before unaliving himself. The funny thing is that since my family bought the property, my uncle had twin sons, my mom had twin sons, and my uncle's brother, who was also part owner of the property, had twin sons. The weirder part is that my brothers and my uncles and aunties' kids were playing near the forest when they were in their early teens and kept on saying they heard boys laughing but couldn't see anybody there, not knowing the house's history. So spooky. I mean, families with twins can be genetically predisposed to having more twins, but wow. Story 6. Years ago, I worked for an office that listed houses for sale. One of them, in an ad I had to create, made my hair stand on end. I noticed it immediately as a weird old flagstone 1910s home with faces carved into the chimney blocks. When I was a kid, this was the unaliving house, although it was about 3 miles away from my neighborhood. Everyone knew it and talked about it. The story went that in the 1950s, a new owner and his family moved in, but the husband unalived his 2 kids and wife. Apparently, the police did not suspect foul play, and the husband said his family had left him. Years later, in the early 80s, the property had gone to pot and the man was raising dogs in his backyard. He perished in his house, and when animal control and police arrived, not only was the guy gnawed on by some of his dogs, but his own nephew later found the man's children and wife in a basement freezer, encased in decades of frost. Imagine my surprise when 9-year-old me rode by the place on the day the cops were removing the freezer. I remember seeing it on a blue tarp in the front yard and people taking pictures. That night, there was a quick blurb about it on the news. Years later in my 20s, while creating the sales ad, I learned that this was the first time it was listed for sale since the discovery. Would this still prevent you from buying this house? I know I keep saying it in this video, it still wouldn't prevent me from doing it, but I will admit, reading that story, I was creeped out quite a bit. I'd probably wait a few weeks, or at least I'd use that story to kind of knock the price down a bit. Story 7. Our first home purchase came with a death certificate of previous owner and paperwork to verify the current owner had legally inherited it. Cause of death? Self-unaliving. Location of death? Home. My new home. A quick Freedom of Information Act request yielded the police report from the 60s, which detailed infidelity by his wife. He also apparently cut a chunk of his arm off to remove a tattoo with her name. He caught his wife and lover in bed, beat the hell out of both of them. The next day came home and found them both there. This time, he locked himself in the bedroom and shot himself in the chest with a deer rifle. No one called for help for 3 hours. Police basically said he got what he deserved. Wife lived there with child and new man for 40 years longer. I suspect he was unalived, either planned or the guy took the gun away from him. Deer rifles are hard to shoot yourself with in the chest. Full rifle, not carbine. The door and hardware was original to the house and had no lock or evidence of lock being installed. He was a Korean War veteran and surely knew a chest shot was an undesirable way to catch the bus. The police report was mostly about the wife's injuries from the day before, and they called his doctor and verified he was crazy. I'm conflicted because I'd like the new owners to have these docs as part of the history, but I'm not sure they want them. Story 8. I was selling a home/marina. Before we could sell the house, we had to clean out everything. The basement was flooded for months, so we had to drain that and clean it out. The most disgusting thing ever. It was after a while that we learned the owner of the marina hung himself where we were all taking a break and eating pizza. The clean out after that gave us all an overwhelming feeling of dread. I still think about it when I drive by the place. The stories of stuff in Detroit are a bit funnier and sad. One house we had was broken into. We went to board it up and heard water running in the basement. It was flooded, but then I heard bumping upstairs. Some guy brought a paid spicy partner in the house and was smashing her. We had bats, so we made him leave. We also called the cops. Cops never came. The guy kept driving by to see if we were still there. Meanwhile, the house next door was being stripped of metal to sell at a scrapyard. Other stories include getting shot at, having 2 guys pretend to be Christian helpers who later stole the AC unit from the house, and a little kid stealing my gas can with my name clearly on it. Police came and his parents beat his butt for being so stupid in front of me and the police. That was hilarious. Being from Detroit, none of this surprises me. Story 9. Practically a realtor with how much time I spent doing legwork to buy my house. Creepiest house was the backwards TV house, as we called it. It was easily $200,000 less than any neighboring house. It had some fixer-upper problems, but otherwise a good house. Master bedroom was all windows looking at the mountains and a pool overlooking the valley. We walk in, and no lights work. That's okay. Plenty of windows upstairs to give the living room and kitchen light. We walk into the kitchen, and pictures of the family and children are spread out all over the dining room table. There's still food on the table. Dishes aren't done. All the medicine is still in the drawers. It was as if they were abducted overnight from some government agency. We go downstairs, and it's very dark. Only a few windows. All of the TVs are turned backwards facing the wall. These aren't flat-screen lightweight TVs either. These are the old-school giant TVs. There are notes all over the house about how much they love and miss each other. Love notes to the woman of the house, and a bunch of notes which get more and more insane. It was very poltergeist. It was top-notch creepy stuff. We have no idea what happened there, but we can only assume they had to flee the country or ghosts. All the TVs turned around to face the wall. Kinda creepy, yeah. Sort of reminds me of like the Black Mirror version of the last scene of Blair Witch Project. I would admit that would be kind of creepy. I know there would be a practical reason for moving those around. Maybe they were painting or cleaning the house. But yeah, I will admit that's creepy. Story 10. The day after my condo received an excellent offer, my realtor forwarded me a newspaper article. In 1991, 2 drifters tried to hack a man to death in my kitchen in front of one of the drifters' 14-year-old daughter. Then they strangled him, dragged him down the stairs and about a block down the street before deciding to abandon the plan to dump him in the Mississippi. This was New Orleans. They were caught because they did a terrible cleanup job. Just turned over couch cushions and didn't bother mopping up all the blood. Real winners. A weird thing about the place was that if I left anything stacked on a certain kitchen counter, it would fall off in the middle of the night, waking me up. I figured it was some shoddy counterwork and just stopped leaving stuff in that spot. The condo still sold at a premium and on time, even after this was disclosed to the buyer. That area was a hot market. One of the people is still in jail. He's a preacher now because, yeah. Story 11. Not a realtor. Happened to some friends who bought a property, very old site, about 300 years old, which had been part of a convent. The living room of the nuns, exactly. The aforementioned place had been refurbished as small apartments/houses about 50 years ago. They went to live there, and there was some maintenance given to certain places of the property, the common areas. There was a wall which was slightly wider than the others. They began to give maintenance to that wall, but the outer layer fell apart due to the rain and age. While trying to fix that, they found dozens of skeletons of babies. Very little babies, and very old skeletons. Well, authorities and historians came and went by, and they came to the conclusion that the nuns tossed their babies there right after giving birth to them. Lord knows if they were alive or dead by then. Note, not unheard of, old religious orders were very strict about that, and there were even more gruesome policies regarding nuns' pregnancies. Edit. Grammar. The fact that they found dozens suggests to me that a slew of nuns knew this was there, and there was a silent conspiracy to use it as they saw fit, but keep it a secret. As morbid as it sounds, I doubt any babies placed there were alive. If anyone didn't know about the wall tomb, they'd certainly wonder why the wall was crying like an infant. What a sad, sad story. Story 12. Somewhat relevant. When I was younger, probably 8 or 9, my sister took me and a couple of my friends to see Meet the Robinsons, which had just came out. It was a fun movie, and we all enjoyed it. So we went home. My friends were neighbors, and we see a police officer in the street talking to my parents and friends' parents. They all looked shaken up. They told us that our neighbor, who was our next-door neighbor, unalived himself. He shot himself in the head in his backyard. I always thought he was a nice guy. He'd invite everyone over for pool parties, and they were always fun. My parents heard the gunshot and called the police. The guy had many wives over a period of time, and they all either left him or perished. An old lady moved in with her beagle and lived there for maybe 2 years, but she never really talked to anyone. After she left, a family moved in with 3 kids. I played with them a lot. I would go over to their house and play video games or swim in the pool with them. I never felt uneasy there. It was just a fun family, and the pool and having fun was always a nice memory of him. Rest in peace. I think this is a great example of putting positive vibes and spirit into a house to counteract what happened before. Do you think that's possible? If it's possible to get negative vibes and get creeped out by a location, do you think it's possible to create positive vibes in a location and counteract that or overcome it? Story 13. From the other side of the fence. I went with a friend of mine to view commercial properties for his startup computer business. There was one in particular that he was very excited to see, as the setup sounded just perfect. It had a large front room for seating customers/display, was in a strip mall with several other businesses, and it had 2 back rooms, one he could use for stock, one he could use for doing repairs. It also had its own portion of the basement for additional stock or whatever he might need it for. We hadn't been in the door more than 30 seconds, and the realtor started telling us how it was a combo nail salon/massage parlor before it was seized and her company bought it. Yeah, massage parlor and seized. You know where this is going. The 2 back rooms still had the mattresses on the floor, and there were about 8 more mattresses and lots of women's clothing scattered around the basement. He didn't take the property, even though I told him he should have. The looks on the faces of old clients that came in still expecting the brothel to be there would have been priceless. Story 14. I work in property management on the rental side and would frequently do post-move-out walks to assess damages from previous renters and make ready lists for new ones. There was a house on my list that had been vacant for a while in a semi-seedy area. Not a huge deal by any means, as it's the middle of the day. I go to the front door, and it was stuck shut. Shoulder checked it a few times, and it would give a little, but I couldn't get it open, like furniture or something was barring the way. So I walk around back and completely ignore the broken storm door, leading up to the other entry. The second I open the door, I noticed 3 guys standing in the living room around a table. One conveniently had a gun pointed directly at me. I apologized and politely let myself out. No more than 10 seconds after I get into my car, our maintenance calls warning me that the property has been broken into half a dozen times already and I shouldn't go in alone. Wasn't the worst I've seen, but certainly the scariest.
Please like and subscribe if you made it this far. I hope you'll enjoy the rest of the video and have a wonderful day.
Story 15. Classic not a realtor but intro. The house 2 doors down from ours was for sale in mid-July, and the realtor was showing it to a prospective buyer when this happened. A couple of kids set off leftover fireworks at the bottom of the slope past the development. This being California in summer, the entire hillside of dried grasses caught fire immediately. Now you don't see much of these anymore because the construction material got outlawed, but cedar shake roofs were fashionable for a while. Our development got grandfathered in, so everyone on the last street in the block grabbed a garden hose, collectively put out the fire, and hosed down the rooftops. Except for the realtor, who turned around, garden hose in hand, to see the roof already on fire of the house he was showing. It was too high and too far along to put out with garden hoses, so by the time the fire truck arrived, the entire second floor was a loss. The local contractor got a lot of business in the months that followed, replacing our neighbors' cedar roofs. I've grown up in California. Fire season is a thing. Completely a thing. The people in New York now are experiencing a lot of what we go through. Yeah, no one uses cedar roofs anymore. That's just completely insane. Story 16. Realtor here. Not a house I was trying to sell, but a house that was next door to my last house. It was on the market for about 2 years before finally selling to a couple who had been there about 3 years now. The guy across the street was a retired cop and told me that back in the mid-90s, there was a husband and wife that lived there. One day, the wife came home from work and realized her husband was in the backyard chopping down her favorite tree. She took a gun outside and shot him dead. She then went back in the house and shot herself in the head. Shortly after that, there were 2 other families that lived there where the father/husband perished of some illness at a younger age. I swear the house is cursed or haunted. There were random times when it was in foreclosure where I would go into my kitchen and a basement light would randomly be on. Never had the nerve to tell the couple that bought it before I moved. Story 17. These are mostly from the commercial side, but here goes. Various. Florida, mainly. 80s rock substance house/apartment complex where the previous owner was in jail for fraud. Previous owner unalived in officer-involved shooting. Current owner was a ward of the state due to advanced dementia and family drama. Site was owned by relatives who can't get along with one another. Homophobic dad tried to cheat his gay son out of their apartment building and shopping center. Tax fraud. Migrant farm worker housing with open code violation. The owner preferred illegal immigrants because if they complain, they'll get deported, so they keep shut. No-tell motel. Owner-sponsored jet ski racing. Tenant-sponsored jet ski racing, including the same riders as above. This is a totally different property in a different municipality. Neighbor-sponsored jet ski racing, including the same riders as above. Seeing a theme? Welcome to Florida. Shop/apartment where previous tenants were 80s rock substance heads who repeatedly burglarized the shop. Code violations, code violations, code violations. Paid spicy time. We once did a Pentecostal church, too. Not during services. Story 18. Not a realtor, but the house next door to my parents used to belong to this rude elderly woman. She really should have been in a home, as she would fall often, and then neighbors would have to come rescue her, or she'd suddenly have some weird task like buying a TV and then calling my parents to take her to buy one, then having them set it up, thus eating up half my dad's weekend when he could have been resting. Anyway, she was determined to expire in her house. And she did. Our neighbor found her dead in her chair. So her only relative, an older woman, came to claim things from the house that another woman that lived a few doors down hadn't already stolen, and she sat down, and she perished as well. 2 deaths in the house in less than a week. New neighbors moved in, and they've been there several years now. Story 19. When I bought my house in one of the rooms without carpet, just a bare wood floor, there were 3 paint-covered spots. I was told that the previous owners moved out because they couldn't afford it or something. But according to the realtor, they left their 2 dogs and cat in that room. I guess the cat was eaten or perished first, then eaten by the dogs. Then the dogs eventually perished. So there are paint spots covering whatever stain the unalive animals left. That is such an awful thing to do, to leave your animal to perish in a room. If you're not going to rehome or take them with you, the very least they could have done is just let them loose to at least get picked up by animal control or perish free. Not acceptable, but still better than starving to death in a room without any chance of survival. Story 20. My dad moved into a house where we later learned that the previous owner's son unalived himself. There was no saying as to whether he lived in the house, but we do know which bedroom was his. I'm not into paranormal nonsense, but my sister had that room. Before we learned about the son unaliving himself, she had all sorts of weird things happening in the room. Alarms going off at odd hours of the night, the TV just turns on or shuts off whenever it feels like it, especially weird when it's at night and you're alone. I don't like going up there for that reason. The previous owner also came home one day to catch his wife cheating on him and started shooting at them. He missed them, and you can still see the bullet marks in the wall of the master bedroom. Story 21. My dad flips houses for a living. Back when I was in grade school, he bought a duplex that was in foreclosure. One side was completely normal, and the other side was disgusting. The guy who lived there before never paid his water bill and peed in jars that he kept literally all over the place. He had no furniture, and it was like he never unpacked because there were boxes everywhere that were super unorganized. It was odd because we found out that he was a waiter at one of the oldest country clubs in CLT and made decent money. He left all of his money scattered between his piles of poop, literally and figuratively. My parents had my other siblings and I go on a scavenger hunt for all the money and to help clean it out. Ew. Story 22. Didn't sell the house, but was managing an apartment and walked in on a guy who was in bed decomposing for 2 weeks over the worst heat wave in years. His head was partially melted into the pillow, and his back was full of maggots. Had a couple stiff ones that night. Walked through a house where a hoarder lived and was attacked by fleas and saw a rat in the master bedroom the size of a football. Noticed droppings on the bed, too. Lady had been living there her entire life and never threw anything away. Apparently couldn't get rid of the rat either. I've flipped and helped with flips and sales since I was 18. I can go on and on and on with the conditions I've seen people living in and the history behind them. Story 23. Bought my house 2 years ago. The realtor said that the woman of the house just wanted to move after her husband had perished. Fair enough, I thought. Memories and such. The living room had received a new carpet, and in general the house was and is in pretty good shape. Still live here. Anyways, we've been living in the house for a couple of months when I got to talk to a neighbor. We talked about my house, and she said it was awful what happened here. I was like, what? Apparently, the husband was a police officer, but he had some issues, so he blew his brains out in the living room for his family to find. Hence the new carpet. I don't mind one bit, but the realtor could have said something. Story 24. I live in Kingsport, Tennessee, and there's an old hospital on Netherland Inn Road that is now an apartment building with like 3 or 4 separate apartments in it. I've never lived there, but know of people who have. One of the apartments is in what used to be the morgue, and no one lasts long living there because during the night it goes from warm to extremely cold, and the lights flicker. It scares everyone off. There's also reports of noises, screams, moans, etc. throughout the entire building. My ex-boyfriend's great-grandmother actually perished there when it was a hospital from a ruptured appendix. It's so creepy looking, even from the outside. I don't even like driving by it, so I take alternate routes. I can't imagine what it's like inside. Story 25. Not a realtor. I was looking for an apartment in a condo complex for a long time, which is never vacant. One day, the manager gave me a call to tell me a duplex opened up. I was happy to hear that, but then she clarified. Sir, it is my duty to tell you that this was a scene of a domestic disturbance, and it resulted in a fatal incident. I looked it up. Turns out the husband unalived the wife with a hammer. The dead body was in the house for a couple of days. The management became suspicious when they saw the husband have scratches, if I recall correctly, on his forearms, and specifically tell them not to send maintenance men to his home. Story 26. My husband is a realtor and works with a few lawyers that represent estates. He had one home where a woman had committed self-unaliving via shotgun in the bathtub. By the time my husband got there, the body was gone, but he had to have a biohazard team come in and clean up the bathroom. What he said was the saddest part was that the woman was estranged from her family, and rather than not have photos of them around, she had turned all the framed pictures around on the walls or put them face down on tables. He said he felt like he was walking around in her life since everything was left just like any normal day. Story 27. The house I remodeled with my dad as a kid, or helped in whatever non-help way 11-year-old me could help. Some of my only good memories of my dad was tagging along while he worked on it. After my dad expired, it was sold and an investor bought it and rented it to a bunch of substance users. They trashed it. Eventually, it was condemned because of black mold everywhere. Then one of the previous tenants was still living there and overdosed, and his corpse was rotting in the house for about a month. Dead of winter, so not a lot of smell. Now it's been sitting empty for more than a year. Ticks me off sometimes. Story 28. Aunt was unalived at 16 in my grandma's house. It was her ex, and he also unalived himself. Grandma sold it at a horrible loss a few years later when she just couldn't handle it anymore. Mom moved back to the neighborhood years after that, and I randomly met the people who owned it then at a neighborhood car show. Had changed hands a few times since. Told them about how the pool was my mom's 16th birthday gift. And oh, by the way, there was an unaliving, self-unaliving in the kitchen/bathroom. They sold 2 weeks later. Turns out their toddler had been talking to an imaginary friend, and it freaked them out when said friend had my aunt's name. Story 29. Not a realtor, but in my own house I still live in. My parents bought the house from an old 70-plus lady about 19 years ago. One day when I was about 12, I'm 17 now, my mom and I were watching TV about some person living in a house that was haunted because somebody had perished in it. I bring it up to my mom how creepy it is to live in a house where someone expired. She responds back telling me that somebody committed self-unaliving in my bedroom, and that old lady was selling the house because she could hear her daughter in the bedroom. Story 30. Not a realtor, but I used to live just outside a military base, and the house used to be a part of it. There were strange bells above all the doors. The realtor said they were old fire alarms. The bells could not be removed and made the loudest, unbearable noise when we tried to remove them. One day, I was watching the History Channel, and the show was about my town. Turns out, These were not the loudest fire alarms in the world, but alarms for if the overflow of Nazi prisoners in the basement escaped or acted up. Story 31. Not necessarily disturbing, but kind of sad. We were selling a condo of a couple who were both 99 and married for like 80 years. Their condo was in original 1968 condition. Shag carpet, avocado green appliances, thick textured wallpaper. They were moving to be closer to their children and their already purchased gravestones. They knew death was coming and wanted to make it easier for their families. Pretty sweet. Anyways, they were very nice, but ended up perishing about a year later. The husband and wife perished about 3 weeks apart. Story 32. I learned just how extensively the original builder had embezzled from the school district to build the house. People of a certain age would marvel at the fact that all the bricks, flooring, doors, door and window frames, bricks, light fixtures, all kinds of elements were exactly 1920s public school construction. Turns out the builder was the school superintendent and deliberately built the house with diverted materials and labor from a school project, and was caught and publicly shamed for it. Story 33. I work in real estate appraisal, not the actual picture-taking side, the administrative side. There isn't much real history selling a home will give you. Stuff like self-unalivings and unalivings do not have to be mentioned in a report. Oddly, believed hauntings do, as long as it's public knowledge. This is a law. I've had appraisers who report to me they've been accosted by squatters living in vacant homes. It's possible your house briefly housed a junkie shooting up in your basement before you moved in. Story 34. Not a realtor, but I have a friend who recently bought a house. She had lived in it for a year and went up in the attic for the first time to check on a leak. In the dark, she could see some kind of painting hung up on the wall. She went to check it out and found a large commission painting of Jesus giving the previous owner of the house a hand job. This is in a very Mormon area, a block away from a Mormon temple. Story 35. I live in a duplex. One night I was cooking dinner and heard an incredibly loud bang. Went to the living room to see holes in my wall. Turns out the neighbor next door shot himself with a shotgun. Instead of them completely redoing the walls, they painted over the walls. In red. Nobody will rent that side of the duplex. I tell them that story and they book it. I realize I'm no realtor, but I figured I'd share. Story 36. I showed a property that had been a substance manufacturing plant / hideout for Walter White substance production. When we did an oil tank search to determine location of the tank that supplied the heat to the house, 5 tanks were located. They were cars buried 10 to 15 feet deep throughout the property. Inside were large amounts of Walter White substance supplies / ingredients, but worst of all, the bodies of 4 paid spicy partners were also found inside the cars. Story 37. I'm an actual realtor. There was a time in my life where if somebody told me a house was haunted, I would have reserved judgment and most likely chalked it up to an overactive imagination. However, I've seen it a few times in my career, and there are some pretty common threads that are difficult to ignore. Well then, out with it. You can't just leave it hanging like that. Story 38. Ooh, finally I have use for this info. We moved when I was in elementary school, and after the fact, my dad found out from neighbors that one man had unalived himself in what was now my bedroom, and another he unalived himself on the patio just outside my bedroom. I didn't learn this until I was maybe 13 or so, and it freaked me the hell out. Story 39. My friends were getting a tour of a ski rental to secure the winter in Tahoe. They went to one of the bedrooms, and there was a mirror on the ceiling above the bed. The realtor wasn't expecting that and tried moving them to the next room as inconspicuously as possible. Apparently, it was a pretty awkward tour. Story 40. My brother lives in a house that belonged to one of the victims of the Columbine High School shooting. The girl who lived there was paralyzed in the attack, and the house was all stairs. Then, the mother unalived herself, so the rest of the family moved away. For all that, there's not a creepy vibe at all. Story 41. My uncle bought a caravan down the coast on a well-known beach. Just prior to selling it, police detectives turn up and turn the place upside down and inside out looking for some sort of information. Turns out the family of one of Australia's most notorious serial unalivers used to own the caravan many years ago. Story 42. Too late to the thread, but I'm a contractor and recently dismantled what seemed to be a torture room in the basement of a house some clients were selling. Creepy broken mirror included. I've got pictures if the interest is there. Show and tell, mate. Give us the pictures. Story 43. It had a material defect making it unfinanceable, and the seller didn't have the money to fix it. Honestly, this is every realtor's worst nightmare. Unaliving house? Meh. Busted sewer line? Oh, God, no! Story 44. And if you're viewing a house where someone has perished, look for the part where the carpet has been removed, often bottom of the stairs, as this is usually where the bodies were found. Story 45. Property inspection turned up an unalive body in the attic. It was a suicide. Someone hung themselves. Homeowner thought her husband left her years ago. I guess he did. Story 46. Several mafia bosses retired to Tucson, Arizona, and supposedly their houses still there have secret getaways and showers and closets in case they need to escape.
Please leave your story in the comments. I would love to make a video on them in the future. Also, don't forget to like and subscribe.